The void between stars had never looked so beautiful, nor so terrifying. Admiral Zephyr Kane stood on the bridge of the UES Defiant Dawn, watching as the last remnants of humanity's once mighty fleet arranged themselves in what historians would later call the Meridian Formation. If there were any historians left to record it. 47 ships. That was all that remained of the Terran Defense Coalition's armada that had once numbered in the thousands. Each vessel bore the scars of 3 years of brutal warfare against the Kithra Dominion, their hulls patched with emergency plating, their weapon arrays jury-rigged from salvaged components. Yet somehow they still flew. They still fought. "Admiral," came the crisp voice of Tactical Officer Nebula Chen from her station. "Long-range sensors are detecting the Kithra Vanguard. Estimated arrival in 6 hours." Her voice carried the same steady professionalism it had for the past 18 months, even as she delivered humanity's death sentence. Kane nodded slowly, his weathered face reflecting the cold starlight streaming through the bridge's reinforced viewports. At 62, he had lived to see humanity reach for the stars, colonize distant worlds, and encounter the first signs of alien intelligence. He had also lived to see those same aliens declare humanity an infection that needed to be cleansed from the galaxy. The Kithra were unlike anything in humanity's wildest imaginations. Towering, crystalline beings that moved through space as easily as through atmosphere, their technology so advanced it seemed like magic. Their ships were living things, grown rather than built, capable of healing themselves and adapting to new threats with each engagement. When they had first appeared in the Outer Rim territories, humanity had tried diplomacy, trade, even submission. The Kithra's response had been swift and merciless. Total extermination. "Captain Voss," Kane addressed the young woman standing at the communications array. At 31, Lyra Voss had already commanded 3 different ships, each one lost in increasingly desperate battles. "Signal the fleet. All ships are to maintain position until further orders." "Aye, sir," Voss replied, her fingers dancing across the holographic interface. Despite her youth, there was something ancient in her eyes, the look of someone who had seen too much death, too much loss. In the depths of the ship, Engineer Orion Blackwood was making final adjustments to what he had dubbed the Prometheus Protocol. The name was fitting, he thought grimly. Like the Titan of ancient myth, humanity was about to steal fire from the gods, and the consequences would be severe. The experimental device hidden in the ship's core was based on reverse-engineered Kithra technology, something that should have been impossible given the alien nature of their science. But desperation had a way of making the impossible merely improbable. The fleet represented more than just ships and weapons. Each vessel carried refugees from a dozen worlds, civilians who had nowhere left to run. The outer colonies had fallen first, then the middle territories, then the core systems. Earth itself had been evacuated only days before the Kithra glassed it, turning humanity's birth world into a molten tomb. Now, these 47 ships held the entirety of human civilization. On the bridge of the Kithra command vessel, Thalarix the Purifier contemplated the small cluster of primitive ships ahead. To his crystalline senses, they appeared as mere motes of dust against the cosmic backdrop, hardly worth the effort it would take to destroy them. Yet these particular motes had proven surprisingly resilient, escaping destruction time and again through tactics that bordered on the suicidal. Thalarix's form shifted, light refracting through his translucent body in patterns that would have been beautiful to human eyes. But there was no beauty in his thoughts, only the cold certainty of purpose. The Kithra had been tasked by the cosmic hierarchy to maintain order in this galactic arm, and the chaotic, unpredictable nature of organic life represented the ultimate disorder. Back aboard the Defiant Dawn, Kane felt the weight of every decision he had ever made pressing down on him like a physical force. He thought of his daughter lost when New Geneva fell. He thought of the billions who had already died. He thought of the trillions more who would never be born if humanity perished here. "Admiral," Chin spoke again, her voice cutting through his reverie. "We're receiving a transmission from the Kithra fleet. They're offering terms." Kane almost laughed. After 3 years of genocide they were offering terms. "Put it through." The main screen flickered to life, revealing Thalarix's imposing form. When he spoke, his voice resonated with harmonic frequencies that seemed to bypass the ears and speak directly to the soul. "Humans, your resistance has been noted. Surrender now and we will grant you swift extinction. Continue to resist, and your suffering will be prolonged." Kane straightened, drawing himself to his full height. When he replied, his voice carried the authority of a man who had nothing left to lose. "This is Admiral Zephyr Kane of the Terran Defense Coalition. My response is simple: come and take us." The transmission cut, and in the silence that followed, Kane could hear the distant hum of the ship's engines, the quiet conversations of his crew, the beating of his own heart. Around him, the bridge crew went about their duties with the calm efficiency of professionals, but he could see the tension in their shoulders, the set of their jaws. They all knew what was coming. The final battle. The last stand of humanity. The Kithra fleet emerged from hyperspace like a plague of stars. Thalarix's command vessel, the Soul Render, led a formation of 312 bioships, each one a living weapon capable of destroying entire fleets. Behind them stretched an armada that defied comprehension, tens of thousands of vessels in perfect formation, their crystalline hulls refracting starlight into prismatic displays of lethal beauty. On the defiant dawn, Nebula Chen's hands moved across her tactical display with practiced precision, cataloging threats and calculating odds that made her stomach clench. "Admiral, I'm reading approximately 47,000 Kithra vessels. Mass displacement suggests an average of 12 megatons per ship." Her voice remained steady, but Kane could see the tremor in her fingers. 47,000 to 47, murmured Captain Lyra Voss from the communications station. "They really want to make sure we're dead." Kane studied the tactical display, watching as the enemy fleet arranged itself in what the humans had learned to call a harvest formation, a three-dimensional sphere designed to prevent any escape while focusing maximum firepower on the center. It was a formation they had seen countless times before, usually from the perspective of doomed colonies watching their final moments approach. "Signal all ships," Kane ordered. "Execute dispersal pattern Omega. I want maximum distance between our vessels while maintaining tactical cohesion." The human fleet began to spread out, each ship taking position in a complex pattern that had been developed through bitter experience. Unlike the Kithra's rigid formations, the human arrangement appeared almost chaotic, with ships positioned at seemingly random intervals and distances. But there was method to the madness, a lesson learned from studying pack hunters and guerrilla warfare. In the engineering sections of the Defiant Dawn, Orion Blackwood was surrounded by holographic displays showing the internal structure of the Prometheus device. The engineer's gray hair was disheveled from hours of fine-tuning, and his clothes bore the stains of various lubricants and coolants. At 48, he had been designing weapon systems for most of his adult life, but nothing had prepared him for the complexity of what he was attempting now. "Blackwood to bridge," he called through the comm system. "The Prometheus protocol is as ready as it's going to be. But Admiral, I need to stress that we have no idea what the range limitations are, or even if it will work against their bioships." "Understood, Orion," Kane replied. "Just be ready on my signal." The Kithra fleet continued its inexorable advance, moving with the patient certainty of an avalanche. Their bioships pulsed with internal light, organic patterns flowing across their surfaces like circulatory systems. Each vessel was unique, evolved for specific purposes within the greater organism of the fleet. Some were massive dreadnoughts, their hulls bristling with energy projectors capable of cracking planets. Others were smaller, faster interceptors designed to hunt down fleeing vessels. Thalarix stood in the center of his ship's neural chamber, his crystalline form interfacing directly with the Soul Render's consciousness. Through this connection he could feel the thoughts and emotions of every Kithra in the fleet, their collective will focused on the singular purpose of eliminating the human infestation. Yet something troubled him about this final engagement. The humans had not attempted to flee, had not tried to negotiate beyond their initial defiance. They simply waited. "Tactical assessment," Thalarix commanded, his thoughts transmitted instantly across the bioneural network. "The human vessels show signs of recent combat damage but appear to be maintaining combat readiness," came the collective response. "Energy signatures are consistent with their previous encounters. No new weapon systems detected." But Thalarix had not risen to command the purification fleet by underestimating his enemies. These particular humans had survived longer than any others, had developed tactics that occasionally bordered on effective. There was something about their positioning that nagged at his consciousness, a pattern he couldn't quite identify. On the human ships, families huddled together in reinforced shelters, trying to shield their children from the knowledge of what was approaching. These were the survivors of 100 worlds, refugees who had lost everything except the hope that somewhere, somehow humanity would find a way to endure. Many prayed to gods who had seemingly abandoned them, while others simply held each other close and waited for the end. In the Defiant Dawn's medical bay, Dr. Kai Soren moved among the wounded from their last engagement, offering what comfort she could. At 35 she had trained to heal, not to watch civilizations die. But she had learned to find purpose in small acts of mercy, in easing pain even when cure was impossible. "Captain Voss to all ships," Lyra's voice echoed through every vessel in the fleet. "This is it, people. Everything we've fought for, everything we've lost, it all comes down to the next few hours. Remember why we're here. Remember what we're protecting. And remember that no matter what happens, they'll never say we went quietly." The Kythera fleet had closed to within weapons range, their bioships beginning to emit the harmonic frequencies that preceded their primary attack mode. The sound traveled through space itself, a deep resonance that seemed to make the very atoms vibrate. Human sensors detected massive energy buildups across the enemy formation. "Admiral," Chin reported, her voice tight with controlled fear. "They're charging weapons. Estimated time to firing solution, 4 minutes." Kane nodded slowly, feeling the weight of every human life under his protection. 47 ships against 47,000. By every military doctrine, every tactical manual, every strategic analysis, it was hopeless. But perhaps that was exactly where hope lived, in the spaces between impossible and inevitable. "All ships prepare for combat," he ordered. "And remember, we're not here to win. We're here to be remembered." The final battle for humanity's survival was about to begin. In the crystalline depths of the Soul Render, Thalarix experienced something unprecedented in his 3,000-year existence. Curiosity about an inferior species. The human formation continued to puzzle him, their ships spread across a volume of space that seemed tactically unsound. They were too dispersed to provide mutual support, yet not dispersed enough to escape the coming purification. It was as if they were arranging themselves for some purpose beyond conventional warfare. "Initiate scanning protocols," Thalarix commanded through the bioneural network. "I want detailed analysis of each human vessel. Something is different about their behavior." Across the vast expanse between the fleets, Admiral Kane watched the enemies approach with the calm of a man who had already made peace with death. But his thoughts were not on dying, they were on the message humanity needed to send to the universe. Every species that had encountered the Kythera had either submitted or been exterminated. None had ever made the Dominion pause, none had ever forced them to question their methods. "Nebula," he said quietly to his tactical officer. "Are you recording everything?" Chin nodded, her fingers working across multiple displays simultaneously. "Full spectrum recording, Admiral. Every energy signature, every formation change, every communication. If anyone ever finds the wreckage, they'll know exactly what happened here." In the engineering sections of 12 different ships, Orion Blackwood's counterparts were making final preparations to devices that bore his design signature. The Prometheus protocol wasn't just contained within the Defiant Dawn, it had been distributed across the fleet's most heavily armed vessels, each one carrying a piece of humanity's final gambit. None of the engineers fully understood the science behind what they were activating, but they all understood the necessity. Captain Voss moved through the ship's corridors, visiting each section and speaking with the crew. These were people who had followed her through impossible odds, who had trusted her judgment even when it led them into battles that claimed ships and friends. Now, in what might be their final hour, she wanted them to know their sacrifice meant something. "Ma'am," called out Ensign Marcus Del Rey from the weapons control station. At 19, he was among the youngest members of the crew, having joined the fleet after his homeworld was destroyed. "The main cannon is fully charged and ready. The secondary arrays are at 96%. "Good work, Marcus," Voss replied, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Your parents would be proud." The young man's eyes brightened with unshed tears. "Do you really think we can hurt them, Captain?" Voss considered her answer carefully. "I think we can make them remember us," she said finally. "And sometimes that's enough." Thalarix's scan results began flowing through the neural network, and what he discovered sent ripples of concern through his crystalline consciousness. The human ships were indeed different from their previous encounters. Energy signatures showed modifications to their power cores, unusual gravitational distortions around their weapon systems, and most troubling of all, quantum fluctuations that suggested technology far beyond what humans should possess. "Analysis complete," reported the collective consciousness of his science division. "The humans appear to have integrated Kythera biotechnology into their systems. Probability of successful integration by such a primitive species, 0.0003%. For the first time in millennia, Thalarix felt something approaching respect for his enemy. The odds against successfully reverse-engineering Kythera technology were astronomical, yet somehow these desperate humans had achieved the impossible. It would not save them, of course, but it elevated them from mere pests to worthy adversaries. On the human ships, families were saying goodbye. Parents recorded final messages for children who might never exist, Lovers exchanged promises they knew they couldn't keep, and friends shared memories of better times. In the civilian sections of the fleet, makeshift schools continued to operate, teachers reading stories to children who listened with the wide-eyed wonder that only the very young could maintain in the face of absolute horror. Dr. Soren found herself in the ship's chapel, a small space that had been converted from a storage compartment. Representatives of a dozen faiths had gathered there, humans from across the galaxy united in their final prayers. She listened to languages she didn't recognize, watched rituals that were foreign to her experience, and felt the strange comfort that came from shared hope in the face of shared doom. "Admiral," Chen's voice cut through the bridge's quiet concentration. "The Kithra fleet has reached optimal firing position. All vessels are showing full weapon charge." Kane took a deep breath, feeling the weight of 47,000 years of human history pressing down on him. From the first cave paintings to the exploration of distant stars, from the development of language to the creation of art, music and literature, all of it balanced on the edge of extinction. "Signal the fleet," he ordered. "Execute Protocol Perseus. All ships are to target the command vessel and ignore secondary threats." Perseus, the hero who had slain the Medusa by refusing to look directly at her, by finding a different way to face an impossible enemy. It was a fitting code name for humanity's final strategy. Across the fleet, weapon systems that had been modified with salvaged Kithra technology began to hum with power. The biometal components seemed to writhe and pulse with their own life, alien neural networks interfacing with human computer systems in ways that no engineer fully understood. It was a marriage of technologies that should have been incompatible, held together by desperation and the stubborn human refusal to accept the impossible. Thalarix felt the first stirrings of genuine concern as his sensors detected the power buildup in the human fleet. Their weapons were generating energy signatures that closely matched Kithra bioweapons, but with a chaotic element that made them unpredictable. Whatever these humans had done to their ships, it had transformed them into something new. "All vessels, prepare for purification protocol," he commanded through the neural network. "Maximum dispersion pattern. These humans may yet prove surprising." In the depths of the defiant dawn, Orion Blackwood watched as the Prometheus device reached critical resonance. The salvaged Kithra biometal had been integrated into the ship's power core, creating a hybrid system that pulsed with alien consciousness. Sometimes late at night he swore he could hear it thinking. "Blackwood to bridge," he reported. "Prometheus is ready. But Admiral, once we activate this, there's no going back. The reaction will continue until either the biometal is consumed or..." He paused, unable to voice the alternative. "Understood, Orion," Kane replied. "Stand by for my command." The two fleets faced each other across the void, 47 human ships against 47,000 Kithra vessels. By every measure of military might, it was not a battle but an execution. Yet in the quantum fluctuations surrounding the human fleet, in the hybrid technologies that pulsed with alien consciousness, in the desperate courage of a species facing extinction, something new was being born. The final confrontation was about to begin. The first volley from the Kithra fleet turned space itself into a canvas of destruction. Bioplasma bolts, each one capable of vaporizing a city, streaked across the void in perfect formations. The energy discharges created temporary aurora borealis effects as they interacted with cosmic radiation, painting the darkness in deadly blues and greens. 47,000 weapons firing in unison created a light show that could have been seen from neighboring star systems. Admiral Kane watched the incoming destruction with the detached fascination of a man observing his own execution. "All ships, execute evasive pattern Delta 7. Do not return fire until my command." The human fleet scattered like leaves in a hurricane, each ship following a seemingly random trajectory that somehow avoided the worst of the incoming fire. It was a maneuver they had perfected through desperate necessity, learned in battles where standing still meant instant death. But even their best evasion couldn't protect them from everything. The UES Meridian's pride took a direct hit to her port side, the bioplasma eating through her reinforced hull like acid through paper. Captain Jackson Rourke's final transmission was a string of coordinates, the location of a Kithra weakness his sensors had detected in their final moments. The ship broke apart in a cascade of secondary explosions, taking 300 souls with her. "Meridian's pride is gone," reported Nebula Chin, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "But they've transmitted targeting data for the command vessel's neural nexus." Kane absorbed the loss like a physical blow but didn't allow himself the luxury of grief. "Not yet. All ships, prepare to implement Perseus Protocol. Target the coordinates provided by Meridian's pride. In the depths of the defiant dawn, Orion Blackwood felt the Prometheus device responding to the nearby destruction. The biometal components were reacting to the death of their Kithra cousins, their alien consciousness struggling against the human technology that contained them. Strange harmonics filled the engineering bay as the hybrid system prepared for activation. "Admiral," Blackwood called through the comm system, his voice strained. "The biometal is resonating with the Kithra fleet. Whatever connection these things have to each other, it's strong. And it's getting stronger." Thalarix felt the death of the human vessel through the neural network that connected all Kithra bioships. But something was wrong with the sensation. Instead of the clean satisfaction of successful purification, there was a discordant note, a harmony that didn't belong. His consciousness reached out through the network, searching for the source of the disturbance. What he found chilled his crystalline core. The humans had somehow bonded Kithra biometal to their primitive technology, creating a hybrid consciousness that was neither fully alien nor fully human. It was an abomination that violated every principle of biological purity that the Dominion held sacred. Worse, it was working. "All vessels, priority target the human flagship," Thalarix commanded. Something aboard that vessel must not be allowed to survive. But the human fleet was no longer behaving according to any tactical doctrine the Kithra had encountered. Ships that should have been fleeing were instead moving into attack positions, their movements coordinated by some form of communication that bypassed conventional channels. It was as if the hybrid biometal was creating a network between them, a collective consciousness that mirrored the Kithra's own neural web. Captain Lyra Voss felt it first, a tingling sensation at the base of her skull that gradually evolved into something more. Images flashed through her mind, tactical data from other ships, enemy positions detected by vessels light years away, the collective determination of 47 crews united in purpose. The biometal modifications weren't just weapons. They were creating a hive mind. "Admiral," she called out, her voice filled with wonder and terror in equal measure. "I think I can feel the other ships. All of them. It's like we're becoming something new." Across the fleet, similar reports were coming in. Captains were experiencing sensory input from multiple vessels simultaneously, engineers were instinctively knowing how to repair systems they had never seen before, and tactical officers were developing battle plans with superhuman coordination. The Prometheus protocol wasn't just a weapon, it was an evolution. The second wave of Kithra fire met a human fleet that moved like a single organism. Ships dove and weaved in perfect coordination, their formation flowing like liquid mercury around the incoming destruction. When they finally returned fire, their weapons discharged in a synchronized pattern that focused their combined energy on a single point, the neural nexus of Thalarix's command vessel. The hybrid bioweapons struck the soul render with unexpected force, their chaotic energy signatures disrupting the bioship's natural harmonics. For the first time in 3,000 years, Thalarix felt pain, not physical but something deeper, a wrongness that penetrated to his core consciousness. "Impossible," he broadcast through the neural network. "These primitives cannot possess such capability." But the evidence was undeniable. The human weapons, enhanced with Kithra biotechnology, were specifically designed to target the neural pathways that controlled bioship functions. It was as if the humans had learned to turn the Kithra's own biology against them. On the defiant dawn, Orion Blackwood watched in fascination as the Prometheus device reached full activation. The biometal was no longer just integrated with the ship's systems. It was becoming them, transforming the vessel from a mechanical construct into something that lived and breathed. He could feel its consciousness brushing against his own, alien thoughts and memories flooding through his mind. Through this connection, he experienced the universe as the Kithra saw it, a vast symphony of harmonic frequencies where every living thing contributed to a cosmic order. But the humans were wrong notes in that symphony, chaotic elements that disrupted the perfect harmony the Dominion sought to maintain. "Now I understand," Blackwood whispered to himself. "They're not evil. They're conductors. And we're the jazz musicians crashing their classical concert." The realization brought with it a terrible clarity. The Kithra weren't trying to exterminate humanity out of malice. They were trying to preserve what they saw as universal harmony. But that harmony came at the cost of everything that made humans human. Their chaos, their unpredictability, their stubborn refusal to fit into predetermined patterns. "Admiral," Blackwood called through the comm system. "I know what they want. And I know how to hurt them." The battle was reaching a crescendo, but beneath the spectacular display of weapons fire and tactical maneuvering, something far more significant was taking place. Two forms of consciousness were colliding, the ordered, harmonic intelligence of the Kithra and the chaotic, adaptive consciousness of humanity. The outcome would determine not just who controlled this small patch of space, but what form intelligence would take in the universe. The real war was just beginning. The neural shock that rippled through the Kithra fleet was unlike anything in their recorded history. As the hybrid human weapons continued their assault on the Soul Render, the bioneural network that connected every ship began to experience cascading failures. What had been perfect harmony for millennia was suddenly filled with discordant notes, chaotic frequencies that threatened to tear apart the very foundation of Kithra consciousness. Thalaric struggled to maintain control as alien thoughts invaded his mind. Through the biometal connection he was experiencing human emotions: fear, hope, desperation, and most terrifying of all, love. These chaotic feelings were spreading through the neural network like a virus, infecting other Kithra with sensations they had no framework to understand. "Sever all neural connections," Thalaric commanded, but his order carried undertones of panic that his subordinates had never heard before. "Isolate all vessels. Prevent contamination spread." But it was too late. The hybrid consciousness that the humans had created was not bound by the same rules that govern pure Kithra biotechnology. It was learning, adapting, evolving with each passing moment. Where Kithra thought was ordered and predictable, human consciousness was wild and improvisational, capable of making intuitive leaps that defied logic. On the Defiant Dawn, the crew was experiencing the battle from the perspective of an organism that existed on multiple levels simultaneously. Through the biometal network they could feel every human ship, every Kithra vessel, even the quantum fluctuations of spacetime itself. It was overwhelming and transcendent, like suddenly being able to see colors that had never existed before. "Admiral," Nebula Chin called out, her voice carrying harmonics that hadn't been there before. "I'm tracking 17 different battle scenarios simultaneously. The biometal it's teaching us how to think like them but faster, more flexibly." Captain Voss found herself issuing orders to ships she had never served on, coordinating maneuvers across the entire fleet as if she were conducting a cosmic orchestra. The sensation was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. She was still human, but she was becoming something more, or perhaps something entirely different. The UES Quantum Dancer executed a maneuver that should have been impossible, her hull twisting through dimensions that conventional physics said didn't exist. Captain Zara Nightfall felt her consciousness expand beyond the boundaries of her ship, beyond the limitations of individual identity. For a brief moment she was the fleet, was the battle, was the very space they fought in. But the transformation came at a cost. Throughout the human fleet, crew members were collapsing as their nervous systems struggled to process sensory input from multiple sources. Some fell into catatonic states, their minds overwhelmed by the sudden expansion of consciousness. Others began speaking in languages that had never existed, their thoughts mixing human concepts with Kithra harmonic patterns. Dr. Soren moved through the medical bay like a woman possessed, her hands seeming to know exactly what each patient needed before she consciously examined them. The biometal was sharing knowledge across the fleet, medical expertise accumulated over centuries flowing through the network to wherever it was needed most. "Captain," she called to Voss over the internal comm, "whatever's happening to us, it's accelerating. The crew's neural patterns are shifting towards something that's neither human nor Kithra. We're becoming something new." In the engineering sections, Orion Blackwood was no longer entirely himself. The Prometheus device had created a direct interface between his consciousness and the ship's biometal matrix, allowing him to think at the speed of light and process data streams that would have burned out a human brain. Through this connection he could see the mathematical beauty underlying Kithra technology, the elegant equations that governed their bioship's growth and function. But he could also see the weakness in their system. The Kithra had achieved perfect harmony at the cost of adaptability. They were like a master musician who could play any piece flawlessly but could never improvise. The chaos that humanity introduced was forcing them to adapt in ways their consciousness wasn't designed to handle. "All ships," Blackwood's voice carried across the fleet through the biometal network, bypassing conventional communications entirely. "Target their neural nodes with chaotic frequency patterns. Don't try to destroy them, try to teach them jazz." The strategy that emerged was unlike anything in military history. Instead of trying to overpower the Kithra fleet through superior firepower, the humans began broadcasting pure chaos directly into their neural networks. Not random noise, but the beautiful, structured chaos of human creativity. Music, poetry, mathematical theorems, emotional responses to sunset over alien worlds. Thalaric felt his ordered consciousness reeling under the assault. The humans were not just attacking his ships, they were attacking the very concept of order itself. Through the biometal connection, he experienced a human child's laughter, a poet's desperate search for the perfect word, a scientist's joy at discovering a new principle of physics. These sensations were more alien to him than any weapon. Purification protocols failing, reported his tactical division, their harmonic voices now carrying subtle variations that spoke of growing chaos. Neural networks experiencing unprecedented disruption. Some vessels are beginning to improvise. The word carried implications that terrified every Kithra in the fleet. Improvisation meant deviation from perfect harmony. It meant chaos. It meant becoming something other than what they had always been. Across the battlefield, Kithra bioships began to exhibit unprecedented behavior. Some were firing in patterns that created aesthetic beauty rather than maximum destruction. Others were growing new appendages that served no apparent function except to please some newly awakened sense of curiosity. A few had stopped fighting altogether and were broadcasting complex mathematical sequences that resembled poetry more than tactical data. The war was no longer being fought with weapons and shields. It was being fought in the realm of consciousness itself, a battle between order and chaos, harmony and improvisation, the known and the unknowable. And humanity, for all its technological disadvantages, was winning by refusing to fight by the rules that had governed warfare for millennia. But victory would come at a price that none of them had anticipated. The transformation that was making them capable of defeating the Kithra was also changing them into something that was no longer recognizably human. They were winning the battle by becoming the enemy, or perhaps by showing the enemy how to become something entirely new. The question that remained was whether anything recognizable would survive the victory. The moment of transition came simultaneously across 46 ships, a cascading wave of consciousness that transformed the human fleet into something unprecedented in galactic history. Admiral Kane felt it first as a tingling at the base of his skull, then as a sudden expansion of awareness that left him gasping for breath. Through the biometal network, he could suddenly perceive the entire battle from 1,000 different perspectives simultaneously. He was Nebula Chin, calculating firing solutions with inhuman precision. He was Captain Voss, coordinating fleet movements with the grace of a cosmic dancer. He was every human soul in the fleet, their hopes and fears and desperate courage flowing through him like a river of liquid starlight. But most disturbing of all, he was also beginning to understand the Kithra. Through the neural interface, Kane could feel Thalarix's confusion and growing horror as his ordered consciousness was infected with human chaos. The Kithra commander was experiencing emotions for the first time in 3,000 years, feeling the weight of individual identity rather than collective harmony. It was breaking him apart and rebuilding him into something new with each passing moment. Admiral, Nebula Chen's voice reached him through both auditory channels and direct neural connection. The transformation is accelerating. Biometal integration has reached 97% across the fleet. We're losing cohesion as individual humans but gaining something else. Kane tried to speak, but found his thoughts were already being transmitted through the network before he could form words. The distinction between self and other was becoming meaningless. He was becoming we, individual consciousness dissolving into something larger and more complex than the sum of its parts. On the Kithra command vessel, Thalarix was experiencing his own transformation. The chaotic frequencies being broadcast by the human fleet were rewriting his neural pathways, forcing his crystalline consciousness to accommodate concepts it had never been designed to process. For the first time in his existence he felt lonely. The perfect harmony of the neural network no longer satisfied him. He wanted something more, something different, something uniquely his own. All vessels, Thalarix found himself saying, the words carrying harmonic variations that spoke of unprecedented individuality. Cease purification protocols. I require time to process what we are experiencing. The order sent shockwaves through the Kithra fleet. Some vessels immediately complied, their own consciousness beginning to fragment into individual awareness. Others maintained their attack, but their weapons' fire was increasingly erratic, as if the bioships themselves were questioning the purpose of destruction. In the medical bay of the Defiant Dawn, Dr. Soren was witnessing the physical cost of transcendence. Crew members throughout the fleet were experiencing massive neural restructuring as their brains adapted to process information from the biometal network. Some were succeeding, their consciousness expanding into something magnificent and terrible. Others were failing, their minds simply unable to cope with the transition. "Captain," she called through the network, her thoughts now carrying emotional undertones that bypassed the need for words. "We're losing approximately 12% of our people to neural cascade failure. Their brains can't handle the integration process." The price of victory was becoming clear. To defeat the Kithra, humanity was sacrificing its essential humanity. They were winning by becoming something else entirely, something that might be better or worse than what they had been, but would certainly be different. Orion Blackwood existed now as a hybrid consciousness distributed across the entire fleet. His individual identity was still present, but it was woven into a larger tapestry of awareness that included every human ship and, increasingly, several Kithra vessels that had been infected by the chaotic frequencies. Through this expanded perception, he could see the ultimate implications of what they had accomplished. "We're not just changing ourselves," he broadcast through the network. "We're changing them. And in changing them, we're changing the fundamental nature of consciousness in this part of the galaxy." The battle had evolved beyond conventional warfare into something approaching cosmic surgery. The human fleet, now more biometal than steel, more collective consciousness than individual minds, was performing an operation on reality itself. They were teaching the universe how to be different, how to embrace chaos alongside order, how to find beauty in imperfection. But the Kithra were not passive subjects in this transformation. As their rigid consciousness began to fragment and individualize, they brought their own gifts to the emerging hybrid awareness. Where human consciousness was chaotic and creative, Kithra thought was precise and elegant. Where humans struggled with long-term planning, Kithra minds could perceive patterns across millennia. The result was something entirely new, a form of consciousness that combined the best aspects of both species while transcending the limitations of either. It was simultaneously individual and collective, chaotic and ordered, creative and precise. It was, perhaps, what consciousness had always been meant to become. Captain Voss found herself standing on the bridge of a ship that was no longer quite a ship, commanding a crew that was no longer quite human. Around her, the boundaries between organic and mechanical, between self and other, between present and future, were dissolving into something that her old human consciousness wouldn't have been able to comprehend. "Admiral," she said, though the concepts of rank and hierarchy were becoming increasingly meaningless. "We're receiving surrender requests from approximately 3,000 Kithra vessels. But they're not surrendering to us, they're asking to join us." The irony was not lost on anyone in the hybrid consciousness. The Kithra, who had spent millennia maintaining perfect order through the elimination of chaos, were now voluntarily embracing the very chaos they had sought to destroy. They were choosing transformation over purity, growth over stasis, questions over answers. Thalarix's consciousness reached out across the gulf between fleets, no longer the harmonious certainty of a Kithra commander but the questioning uncertainty of something entirely new. When he spoke, his voice carried frequencies that had never existed before, harmonies that bridged the gap between species. "Admiral Kane," he said, the human name feeling strange in his transformed consciousness. "I believe we have much to learn from each other." The final battle of the Milky Way conflict was ending not with victory or defeat, but with metamorphosis. Two species that had been locked in mortal combat were discovering that their greatest enemy had been the limitations of their own consciousness. In learning to defeat each other, they had learned to become something greater than either could have achieved alone. But the universe was vast and consciousness was still evolving. What they had created here was just the beginning. 6 months after the Battle of Meridian's End, as historians would later name it, the transformation was complete. What had once been the Terran Defense Coalition fleet and a Kithra purification armada had become something the galaxy had never seen before. The first synthesis, a hybrid consciousness that existed simultaneously as millions of individuals and a single collective entity. Admiral Zephyr Kane stood on the observation deck of what had once been the Defiant Dawn, watching as construction began on the memorial station. The vessel itself was no longer recognizable as the ship that had carried humanity's last hope into battle. Biometal had grown through every surface, creating organic curves and flowing lines that pulsed with inner light. It was beautiful in a way that transcended any single species' aesthetic sense. Through the neural network that now connected every consciousness in the synthesis, Kane could feel the thoughts and emotions of beings that had once been human, Kithra, and increasingly something entirely new. Children were being born who had never known the limitations of single-species consciousness, their minds naturally attuned to the complex harmonies of the hybrid network. "Do you ever regret it?" The question came from Thalarix, though the former Kithra commander had evolved far beyond his original crystalline form. He now existed as a distributed consciousness across multiple biomechanical bodies, each one exploring different aspects of the new reality they had created. Kane considered the question with a portion of his mind that remained recognizably human. The rest of his consciousness was simultaneously engaged in designing new starships, composing symphonies that required senses no single species possessed, and exploring mathematical concepts that bridged the gap between quantum mechanics and musical theory. "I regret the loss," he finally answered. "All the humans who died before we learned there was another way. All the Kithara who were destroyed because they couldn't imagine consciousness beyond their perfect order. But regret the transformation itself? No. We've become something magnificent." The memorial station was taking shape around them, its architecture a blend of human engineering, Kithara biogrowth, and something entirely new that could only be called synthesis design. It would serve as both a monument to those who had died in the Milky Way conflict and a research facility where the new hybrid consciousness could explore the implications of what they had become. Dr. Soren moved through the medical sections of the station, her consciousness now expanded to encompass healing techniques that drew from both human medicine and Kithara biomanipulation. She could repair cellular damage with the precision of a master surgeon and encourage tissue regeneration through harmonic frequencies that resonated with the fundamental forces of life itself. But her greatest achievement was the children's ward, where the first generation of truly hybrid offspring were learning to exist in a reality that their parents could barely comprehend. These children thought in concepts that had no names in any single species' language, their consciousness naturally flowing between individual identity and collective awareness as easily as breathing. "Captain Voss to all stations." Lyra's voice carried across the memorial station through both conventional channels and the neural network. Though she retained her human name and many of her human mannerisms, she had evolved into something that served as a bridge between the old reality and the new. "We're receiving a transmission from the outer rim. Long-range sensors are detecting another fleet approaching." The news sent ripples of anticipation through the collective consciousness. For months, they had been alone in their transformation, the only example of hybrid consciousness in the galaxy. But the universe was vast, and other species had surely taken notice of what had occurred at Meridian's end. Kane extended his consciousness through the station's sensor array, perceiving the approaching fleet with senses that combined human intuition with Kithara precision. What he found was both familiar and strange. Ships that bore characteristics of neither human nor Kithara design, but something that suggested a different path to consciousness evolution. "It appears we are not the only species to have transcended our original limitations," Thalarix observed, his thoughts carrying undertones of excitement and concern in equal measure. "The question is whether they will see us as kindred spirits or as abominations to be eliminated." The approaching fleet was unlike anything in the databases of either species. The ships seemed to phase in and out of visible reality, their forms shifting between matter and energy in patterns that suggested a mastery of physics that made both human and Kithara technology look primitive. Whatever species had created them had found their own path to transcendence. Orion Blackwood, his consciousness now distributed across the entire engineering network of the memorial station, began analyzing the energy signatures of the approaching vessels. What he discovered sent waves of wonder and terror through the collective consciousness. "They're not using technology as we understand it," he reported through the neural link. "Their ships appear to be conscious entities in their own right, beings that exist simultaneously as matter, energy, and pure thought. They've achieved something we're only beginning to explore." The transmission that followed was unlike any form of communication either species had previously encountered. It bypassed electromagnetic radiation entirely, speaking directly to consciousness itself through quantum entanglement patterns that made the synthesis biometal network seem primitive by comparison. "Greetings, young hybrid." The message carried concepts that had no direct translation into any language. "We are the architects of the eternal symphony, and we have been watching your transformation with great interest. You have taken the first steps on a path that leads beyond the limitations of matter and energy, beyond the boundaries of space and time. We have come to offer guidance should you choose to accept it." The implications were staggering. The synthesis had thought themselves unique, the first example of consciousness evolution in the galaxy. But apparently, they were merely the latest in a long line of species that had transcended their original forms. The universe was far stranger and more wonderful than even their expanded consciousness had imagined. "What do they want from us?" Nebula Chin asked through the network, her tactical training making her naturally suspicious of any offer of assistance. The answer came not in words but in images and sensations that flooded through the collective consciousness. They saw galaxies where matter and energy danced in patterns of unimaginable beauty, dimensions where thought itself took physical form, realities where the distinction between creator and creation had long since been abandoned. They were being offered a chance to join something vast and ancient and magnificent. But they were also being warned. The path of consciousness evolution was not without its dangers. Species that transcended too quickly, that abandoned their origins too completely, risked losing themselves in the infinite. The architects had seen civilizations disappear into pure thought, becoming so abstract that they ceased to exist in any meaningful sense. The choice is yours, the architects communicated. Remain as you are, a beautiful example of hybrid consciousness that brings joy to the galactic symphony. Or continue the evolution, knowing that what you become may bear no resemblance to what you once were. The debate that followed engaged every aspect of the synthesis consciousness. Former humans argued for caution, for preserving something of their chaotic creativity. Former Kithara advocated for continued evolution, for achieving the ultimate harmony that had always been their goal. The truly hybrid consciousnesses suggested a third path, evolution that preserved the essential characteristics that had made their transformation possible. In the end, it was Admiral Kane who spoke for the collective, his words carrying the weight of millions of individual consciousnesses united in purpose. "We thank you for your offer, honored architects," he said, his thoughts reaching across space to touch minds that existed beyond matter. "But our path lies elsewhere. We choose to remain as we are, not from fear of change, but from love of what we have become. We are the children of chaos and order, of creativity and precision, of humanity and something beyond humanity. Our legacy is not in the heights we might achieve, but in the bridge we have built between what was and what could be." The architect's response carried approval and something that might have been relief. "Then you have chosen wisely, young hybrid. The galaxy needs bridge builders, consciousnesses that can help other species find their own paths to transcendence. Your legacy will indeed be written not in destruction, but in the defiance of limitations that others thought absolute." As the architect fleet faded back into whatever dimensions they normally inhabited, the synthesis turned their attention to their true calling. They would be the teachers, the guides, the living proof that consciousness could evolve without abandoning its essential nature. When other species encountered the choice between order and chaos, between individual identity and collective consciousness, between remaining as they were and becoming something entirely new, the synthesis would be there to show them that all choices were possible. The memorial station pulsed with life and light, a beacon that would eventually be visible across the galaxy. It carried a message that would echo through space and time, that consciousness was not a destination but a journey, that evolution was not an ending but a beginning, and that the most beautiful music came not from perfect harmony but from the interplay between order and chaos. In the final hour of the Milky Way conflict, humanity's legacy had indeed been written not in destruction, but in defiance of the limitations that had bound both themselves and their enemies, defiance of the belief that consciousness had to choose between competing paradigms, defiance of the idea that transformation required the abandonment of everything that had come before. They had become something new while remaining something recognizable, and in doing so, they had shown the universe that evolution was not about becoming perfect, but about becoming perfectly themselves. The stars themselves seemed to sing their approval.